Justice. What a difficult concept to grasp. Why does it hold such different meanings for people? This congregation frequently raises issues around justice. When people ask me what Unitarianism is all about, I begin with the usual explanation that we are a non-dogmatic church, and therefore we don't have these set beliefs to help anyone really understand fully what we are all about. But I always add the caveat that the focus of this Salt Lake congregation is working towards creating a just society. Justice, I insist, reflects the central nervous system that keeps this congregation alive and humming. But then I think to myself, this church may be more biblically based than it wants to admit. Scripture is filled not only with myths of huge proportions, but it consistently highlights the imbalance of power in society that causes poverty and oppression and injustice. The prophetic call that weaves its exhortation to level the playing field throughout the pages of Scripture also echoes right here, right through this congregation. Level the playing field. There are many different voices crying out for justice. Just last Wednesday, we commemorated the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's speech, wrapped rhetorically in a dream and vision, but focused so sharply on a call to justice. There's so many voices who do that. Immigrants desperately trying to feed their families call out for justice. The GLBT community, after centuries of discrimination and oppression, are now just cautiously poised to find justice in the right to marry and obtaining the civil rights that accompany that status of legal marriage. And on this Labor Day Sunday, we may want to honor the labor movement that historically has sought to minimize the suffering of those who stood at the mercy of their employers. The labor movement took action so that the worker, who always found himself or herself at a disadvantage, this worker might be treated more fairly and even with a dash of dignity. Now, owners of industry may well be entitled to their profits, but not at the expense of worker safety, slave wages, child labor, and other forms of oppression. The recent string of catastrophic events in the sweatshops of Bangladesh, where thousands of garment workers died needlessly due to a deliberate neglect of justice. All these casualties made me wonder if circumstances might have been similar in this country were it not for the labor movement. They earned some hard-fought victories that moved our nation towards a better balance of power and human rights. But just when upward mobility and opportunities for advancement for blue-collar, middle-class families felt like the norm back in the 1960s, manufacturers halved the payroll in the 70s, laid off workers, and many manufacturers eventually closed their industries in the 90s. it was more profitable for a company to outsource the work, to take advantage of appallingly low wages and dangerous work conditions in other countries. Neglecting justice, failing to treat workers fairly remained a high priority in our economic system. So there really never was the sense of responsibility that companies felt towards their workers. Only the bottom line mattered, even at the expense of human suffering. If sweatshops increased profits, then sweatshops were found. If not here, then elsewhere in developing nations. Our country has felt the stinging consequences of losing its middle class, and the years of widening income inequality has frayed our country's social fabric. Typical workers have not had a real raise in 4 decades and are now paid roughly 16% less in inflation-adjusted dollars. The bonds of community have unraveled almost beyond recognition. So bring it back to justice. Justice. What does it mean? When you think about it, we come up against 2 opposing orders of reality. One we can think of as communal, the other as private. A helpful metaphor may be how the earth itself is perceived. Is the earth seen as the source of life and nurture, which therefore cannot be divided? The earth is given to all of us, for all of us. Sharing equitably is the only conceivable system by which we can function. The conflicting reality sees the earth as land divisible, property rights, ownership, as an opportunity for individuals to harvest as much as they can for their own prosperity. The earth becomes understood as an engine driving economics. The earth is not about nurture and sharing the bounty, but about personal gain. Think about the current oil and gas lease agreements on 100,000 acres of pristine wilderness right here in the Book Cliffs. It points to a reality mired in property rights and ownership and prosperity for a few. But here's the question with which I wrestle. Is justice the quality of being fair and reasonable with an inherent respect for people? Is this justice ever attainable, or is it merely an ideal? If justice reflects an ideal, then does real life turn exclusively on the wheels of economic self-interest? Or put another way, is justice, with its communal aspects of living more equally, is that merely a romantic perspective on humanity? While ideas of individual ownership, dare I say capitalism, is more a pragmatic view of how things really work in the world. Is that the tension? Just hanging on to this romantic thing, and what really happens in the world is just a pragmatic way of doing business? So are we as a congregation utopian in the ways we think about justice? In the book of Deuteronomy, we read, justice shall you pursue. There's no mention of attainment, only the pursuit. And this is not meant as a cop-out for a less than perfect world. The lesson contained within is that we must pursue the improvement of society, we as human beings cannot perfect it. The perfect society, according to the wisdom contained in Scripture, comes only through divine grace, not human action. In other words, since justice is conceivably a divine and transcendent value, humankind cannot create it. We could only pursue it. Scholars interpreting the Hebrew Scriptures are quick to call the human experience a failed experiment of God. Wow. A failed experiment. If there's a problem to be identified at all, it's that God was too utopian in his thinking. God made the mistake. He was too hopeful for the future of humankind. Scholars describe the Hebrew Scripture as really containing two stories. So, just two stories. The first one is the story of God's hopes and expectations for the human race and our betrayal of them. And the second story is about God looking and searching for the righteous person, looking for the person who does justice and loves mercy. Now, you may recall that as early as the book of Genesis, and I quote, "The Lord saw the wickedness of humankind was great on the earth, and every inclination of the thought of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry he had made humankind on earth, and it grieved him to his heart." Isaac Bashevis Singer takes this quandary to a new level, identifying the great disappointment God feels about the creation with the disappointment all artists feel in whatever they attempt to create. There's a gap between what an artist expects the work to be and how it actually turns out. And if you're an artist, you know exactly what that means. So Singer says every artist, every creator, painfully experiences the chasm between the inner vision and the ultimate expression. God is no different. So I hope that as Unitarians we realize that we don't have to look at God literally as the artist creator of it all in order to absorb this cosmic sadness that justice simply has not panned out as it was originally imagined.